The 2D era of Pokemon is often remembered as the glory days of the franchise, from its inception in 1998 with Pokemon Red and Blue to its glorious end in 2012 with Black and White 2. The aesthetic of 2D Pokemon is like no other. That being said, recent Pokemon games have not been as well received by fans. Sure, they may have sold well, but with issues like poor performance and lazy game design, it's only natural for fans of the series to be upset. The reason for this downfall has typically been attributed to Pokemon's jump to 3D. While the 6th generation as a whole is generally remembered well, it seems like every gen beyond that has become progressively worse. So over the years, I had really fallen off the Pokemon bandwagon, and honestly, it made me kinda sad. The franchise, which I once considered my favorite, had seemingly disappeared from my life. That's why over the past few months, I decided to play through all the older generations of Pokemon. While there are plenty of ways to play the generations, I wanted to play one game per region. The games I ended up choosing were Fire Red, Heart Gold, Emerald, Platinum, Black, and Black 2. This video will be a collection of all my journeys through these games as I try to find out if the 2D Pokemon games were actually good. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are the critically acclaimed remakes of the first Pokemon games, and to many the definitive way to explore the Kanto region. While Pokemon Red and Blue were certainly revolutionary titles, the remakes strive to bring everything good about the newer games to the original generation. At the time, Pokemon was in the middle of the 3rd generation, spearheaded by Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. With the Game Boy Advance's new technology, Game Freak was able to drastically overhaul the visuals and music of their games. Besides just aesthetics, there were plenty of other reasons to remake the 1st generation. Things like special attack and defense didn't exist, many moves were fundamentally broken, and Dark and Steel types weren't created yet. Also, it was literally impossible to trade between Gen 1 and Gen 3, which obviously wasn't ideal. Outside of the gameplay reasons though, I'm sure the Pokemon Company was also aware of the sheer popularity of the 1st generation, and they wanted to recreate it in hopes a new generation of kids would fall in love with the franchise. And well, considering Fire Red was one of my first Pokemon games, I'd say that it worked. Over the past few months, I've played a lot of Pokemon. In fact, many games that I had never played before. But whenever I went into these titles, I found myself trying to figure out if they were actually as good as people remember. But here's the thing, I never actually went back to Pokemon Fire Red because I had just assumed it was essentially the perfect Pokemon game. But recently, my eyes were open to phenomenal games like Pokemon Black and White 2, and my bias towards certain games has started to change. For example, I once thought Heart Gold and Soul Silver were the undisputed best games in the franchise, but now I think that crown would go to Black 2. So even though I've played through Fire Red more times than I can remember, these new experiences made me want to go back and find out if Pokemon Fire Red was actually good. Our journey begins in Pallet Town, where we meet Professor Oak and his grandson to get our first Pokemon. I went with the obvious choice, Charmander, and we battled our rival. After that, we went through Route 1 and into Viridian City, where we were given a parcel that needed to be delivered to Professor Oak. Once we brought it back to him, we were given the Pokedex and sent off on our journey. We head through Viridian City and into Viridian Forest, where I really wanted to catch a Pikachu. This is because I knew that certain gym leaders like Misty would be able to destroy Charmander with water moves. After finding one, we entered Pewter City and face the gym leader Brock. While fire and electric types are definitely not strong against rock types, Charmander had Metal Claw, allowing us to beat him fairly easily. After that, we went on to the next route and into Mount Moon. Inside, we found Team Rocket grunts and some fossils. These could actually turn into one-of-a-kind Pokemon, but honestly, I don't really care for either. Also, Charmander evolved into Charmeleon here. Once we made it out of Mount Moon, we had this dude teach our Pikachu Mega Punch, and we entered Cerulean City. Before we took on the gym, I battled our rival and defeated all the trainers on the Nugget Bridge. I also met the inventor of the PC system, Bill, and turned him back into human after he accidentally made himself into a Pokemon. He actually gave us the SS ticket, which will be important later. With this out the way, we can finally face Misty and get our second gym badge. When we're on our way out, we defeat some Team Rocket members and head on to Route 5, through the underground path and eventually into Vermilion City. Once we arrive though, the gym seems to be blocked off by a tree that we can't get past. All we can do now is enter the SS Anne, which seems to be about to host a party. Inside, there are a bunch of trainers, and we eventually run into our rival again, who clearly has been catching more Pokemon than us. Anyway, we find the captain of the ship, who gives us HM Cut so we can get to the gym leader. After training a bit and doing the worst gym puzzle ever, we finally take on Lieutenant Surge and get the 3rd gym badge. After this though, our journey gets a bit complicated. We need to get to Celadon City, but the problem is that it seems like every entrance to it is closed off. The only way is to go through the rock tunnel next to Cerulean City, through Lavender Town, and an underground pathway. Oh, by the way, in Lavender Town, we visited the Pokemon Tower and fought a rival, but we couldn't progress past a certain point because a ghost was haunting it or something. Anyway, by the time we arrived in Celadon, Charmeleon had already evolved into Charizard, and yes, I still only have 2 Pokemon, but don't worry, I have a plan to fill out the team later. For now, we absolutely blitz Erica's grass types and get the 4th gym badge. We also check out the department store and get ourselves the Thunderstone so we can evolve Pikachu into Raichu. We're still not done in Celadon though, because we find out that Team Rocket's hideout is actually underneath the game corner. Once we defeat all the members here, we meet the leader of Team Rocket, Giovanni, and defeat him in a battle. He leaves behind the Sylph Scope, which we need in Lavender Town, but before that, we could actually get into Saffron City now that we got the Guardsome Tea. Besides taking on the Pokemon Dojo though, we can't actually do anything because of all the Team Rocket members running around. So we head back to Lavender Town in the meantime. Inside the Pokemon Tower, the Sylph Scope helps us identify the ghost as Marowak, the ghost of a Cubone's mother. After freeing its spirit, we see that Team Rocket was holding the caretaker of the Pokemon Tower, Mr. Fuji, hostage. He gives us the Pokemon Flute and we can finally move that Snorlax out of the way on the route below. I would end up catching this thing and using it for the whole playthrough too, so now we have our 3rd official team member. At this point, I was told in my live stream chat that if we use the item finder on the spot where Snorlax was, I would get the leftovers item. The only issue is that I had to catch a ton of unique Pokemon in order to get the item finder, so I went on a bit of a detour catching like 30 different Pokemon. Anyway, we finally went back to Saffron City and Sylphco was open for us to enter. This place was completely overrun by Team Rocket and it took a long time to get through it. Here we battle our rival and get a Lapras, which will be our 4th team member. At the end of it all, we fought Giovanni again and beat him, freeing Saffron City of his control. Now we could take on the gym leader Sabrina and get the 5th gym badge. At this point, we needed to head to the south and I chose to go through the cycling road and into Fuchsia City. As soon as we got here, we could actually take on the gym leader Koga and get the 6th gym badge already. While we were here though, I decided to check out the Safari Zone, a place where we could catch a bunch of rare Pokemon. I wasn't really interested in anything at the moment here, but we did get HM Surf, an essential for continuing our journey. With this, we fly back to Pallet Town, say hi to our mom, and surf south to Cinnabar Island. Here, we can check out the burned down Pokemon Mansion and discover the secrets of Mew and Mewtwo. After this though, we can challenge the gym leader Blaine and get the 7th gym badge. The moment we leave the gym though, Bill tells us to visit the Sevi Islands with him. He asks us to deliver a meteorite to some dude on another island, which ends up getting us into a little side quest where we have to rescue a little girl from the child predator Hypno. But after this, we head back to Viridian City and challenge the 8th gym leader, Giovanni. Now I'm not sure how a known criminal is able to hold a gym leader position, but regardless, we beat him and get our last gym badge. Now I know it might seem strange only having 4 Pokemon this far into the game, but I've been hiding a little surprise this whole time. After I beat Giovanni, I trained up a Dratini I got in the game corner all the way to a Dragonite. Also, I caught a Gloom in the Sevi Islands that I evolved into a Vileplume. Now we have a full team ready to take on the Elite Four, and let me say this is perhaps one of the best teams I have ever constructed. We go through the badge gates and enter Victory Road. Here there are a bunch of strong trainers that we can train against for the Elite Four, but honestly I was confident we could beat it even extremely underleveled. Our first battle was with Lorelei, who actually might be our hardest matchup here. She has a solid team of ice and water types that covered our team decently well. Of course, my team was prepared for this and we advanced to challenge Bruno. He had a fusion of rock and fighting types, which again was a decent matchup for us in theory, but we had too much coverage for him to handle. The third member was Agatha, who used poison and ghost types. We didn't really have anything super effective against them, so we just whittled her team down until we beat her. The last member of the Elite Four is Lance, and his team consists mostly of dragon types. If I'm being honest, his fight was the easiest because I constructed my team with a lot of his weaknesses in mind. Our last fight is with the current champion, who just so happens to be our rival. Technically, he has the most diverse team out of all the Elite Four members, however, it's not actually that good against ours. Dragonite and Lapras are just hands down some of the most overpowered Pokemon in this game, and they made this fight not even close. And with that, we are the champions of the Kanto region. I want to be very honest with my opinions towards this game. Was it fun? Absolutely. Despite the limited amount of options for Pokemon, I still felt like there were plenty of great choices for building my team. Instead of Raichu, I could have gone with Jolteon. Instead of Lapras, I could have gone with Gyarados. So even though we had such a small roster of Pokemon, I think that this could have very well have been my best team in all of my Pokemon runs. With this being said, this game was piss easy. Considering this game came around during the Pokemon Emerald days and I consider that game quite difficult, it really did disappoint me to see how easy Fire Red was. I didn't say this during the playthrough portion of the video, but genuinely I think I lost 2 fights in the entire game. Comparing that to any of the other Pokemon runs I've done on my channel, that's basically nothing. For reference, I lost like 20 times on the second gym of Pokemon Emerald. I'm not saying that it's bad for a game to be easy, especially not a Pokemon game, but if you're gonna give us players the option of having an insane team, you should be giving the bosses in the game just as good of teams. I shouldn't be able to button mash through the game on fast forward and win every fight. I will say I probably have improved a lot at Pokemon in general due to playing the Pokemon World Tournament in Black 2 so much and also playing a lot of Pokemon Showdown, but still. As for the region itself, I do actually like Kanto a lot. While it might not be the most creative, it definitely wasn't bad. It didn't feel particularly linear, which is perhaps my only criticism of great games like Pokemon Black and White. The evil team's story was also weaved in nicely with your own personal journey, and by the time you reach the Elite Four, your character is actually known across the region as a child prodigy. So yeah, much like any other Pokemon game I've played, of course it's good. It might have its flaws, but I still think Fire Red and Leaf Green are perhaps the most replayable Pokemon games out there. I know that when I'm a parent one day, these will be one of the first games I show my kids, and even for myself, I'll probably replay these games several times in the future. Pokemon Fire Red is definitely not my favorite Pokemon game, but it is the definitive way to play the first generation of Pokemon, and to many people, that's more important than any criticism I could give it. Pokemon Heart Gold is my favorite game in the franchise, or at least it was until recently. When it comes to games of our childhood, it's very difficult to separate objectivity versus pure nostalgia. These games came out during the prime of my youth, and to say anything bad about them almost feels illegal. That's why for years I had avoided playing this game again with critical eyes. I didn't want to discover bad things about the game in which I had put it on a pedestal all my life. The same game which I so boldly declared was the peak of the franchise. I mean, sure, I've replayed the game once or twice, but mostly as a way of revisiting my childhood. But you know, after playing so many different Pokemon games recently, the thought of revisiting the Gen 2 remakes has been growing by the day. While I've always called myself a Pokemon fan, my scope on the franchise has been more limited than I thought. Before a couple months ago, I had never even touched Pokemon Emerald, Platinum, or Black and White 2, but now that I've played through almost every mainline game, I think I know what really makes a great Pokemon game. With this in mind, I decided it was time to pick up the game that brought me into the franchise and find out if Pokemon Heart Gold is actually good. Starting out our adventure, we head to Professor Elm's lab to pick our first Pokemon. There's also a strange kid looking through the window outside, but let's keep that in mind for later. For now, we pick Cyndaquil and meet our friend Lyra outside before taking off through Route 29. Honestly, this is the most complicated Route 1 out of any Pokemon game, and it also doesn't help that we don't have running shoes yet. But after several minutes, we make it to Cherry Grove City to get the running shoes and visit Mr. Pokemon's house. He gives us a mysterious egg, and we also meet Professor Oak, who gives us a Pokedex. The moment we leave, Professor Elm calls us and tells us to come back home urgently. On the way there, we see the kid who was looking through the lab's window and he challenges us to a battle. After beating him, we learn that he stole a Pokemon from the lab and we tell the police his name before leaving to challenge the 8 gym leaders of Johto. With that lengthy beginning segment out the way, we can finally get started. We eventually reach Violet City, which separates itself from almost any city we've seen in Pokemon before by taking extreme influence from Japanese culture. There's a gym here, but first we visit the Sprout Tower and take on a bunch of monks. At the top, we find our rival, I guess, who is getting scolded by the head monk for being mean to his Pokemon. Once we finished up in the tower, we evolved Cyndaquil into Quilava and we were ready to take on the gym. We quickly defeated the gym leader Faulkner and got the first gym badge, but after the fight, Professor Elm tells us to pick up that egg we gave him earlier from the local Pokemart. When we leave the store, we meet a girl dressed in a kimono who tells us to take very good care of the egg. With that out the way, we can head through the ruins of Elf and eventually reach Azalea Town. Upon arrival, we see that Team Rocket has reformed and is terrorizing the local Slowpoke population by cutting off their tails and apparently selling them for profit on the black market. We asked the local Pokeball craftsman for help to take on the grunts, but he ended up hurting his back anyway, so we fought them alone. Oh, and also that egg we got ended up hatching into a Togepi, which I didn't really want to use in this playthrough, but we'll keep it on the team until we catch more Pokemon. The next gym leader is Bugsy, who obviously gets cooked by my Quilava, getting us the second gym badge. Our next stop is through the Ilex Forest, where we have to chase down some Farfetch'd and help a lost kimono girl navigate out the forest. Once we're out, we meet Lyra again and her grandparents who run the Pokemon daycare. Also, we see that the police are actively on the watch for presumably Team Rocket or maybe that red-haired kid. Honestly, could be both of them. But finally, we make it to Goldenrod City, one of my favorite places in the game. While it isn't really that huge, as a kid I thought this was basically a never-ending city. Anyway, we check out the department store here and then take on the gym. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the gym leader Whitney is one of the most difficult boss fights in Pokemon due to her overpowered Miltank. But well, let's just say her team didn't stand a chance against my level 26 Quilava. After this, I got addicted to Voltorb Flip in the game corner, then moved on to the next route. On my way to the next town, I decided it was time to do a little bit of exploring. We move this Sudowoodo out the way and then head to the national park. I'm sure we all have fond memories of this place and its relaxing music, but it's really not filled with much to do, so we move on and check out the Pokeathlon. These minigames used to be so fun as a kid, and honestly, it was pretty cool playing them again. After this, I decided to finally head up to Ecruteak City though. We head into a theater and help get rid of a Team Rocket grunt bullying a kimono girl. After helping her, we were given the HM Surf, unlocking a lot of the game for us too. But first, we meet the creator of the Pokemon PC, Bill, and at this point I remembered if you visit him again in Goldenrod City, he'll give you a free Eevee. And at this point I was kind of bored of only having one Pokemon to use in battles, so I picked up an Eevee and then headed to Azalea Town to catch a Heracross. With my new Pokemon, I decided that we could finally head back to Ecruteak City and take on the gym. But first, we have to check out the Burn Tower, where we find the legendary dog trio just chilling at the bottom. While we're here, we run into our rival and he challenges us to a battle. After beating him and watching the legendary dogs run away, a man named Yusin introduces himself to us, and apparently he's really interested in finding Suicune. Now we could take on the gym leader Morty and get the 4th gym badge. Now that we beat this gym, we can actually use Surf, and there's actually a cool Pokemon we can get with this. I went to Union Cave to catch a Lapras, and it was great timing too because this was only available on Friday, the day I decided to start playing. Suddenly my team was looking a lot more competitive. Moving on from Ecruteak, we went into Olivine City to challenge the gym, but we discovered that the gym leader is actually busy taking care of the Ampharos on top of the lighthouse. Apparently it's sick and it needs medicine that can only be found in Cyanwood City, so we take Lapras and surf across the sea to Cyanwood, where we fortunately find a couple things that we need. Most importantly to us, we take on the gym leader Chuck and get the 5th gym badge, but after this we're given the HM Fly, so we pick up the medicine here and then fly back to Olivine to help the Ampharos recover. Oh, also we evolved Quilava into Typhlosion. When the Ampharos is all better, the gym leader Jasmine offers to battle us, and we are able to get the 6th gym badge already. Soon after this, we also evolved Eevee into Espeon, but our next stop is east of Ecruteak City, being Mahogany Town. Before doing anything here though, we have to check out the Lake of Rage, which is currently the site of a rare shiny Gyarados. I went ahead and caught it, and we met the current Pokemon League champion Lance, who informs us of Team Rocket sending radio signals in the air, causing Pokemon to go crazy in the Lake of Rage. We meet back in Mahogany Town, and after he hyper beams a Team Rocket member, he uncovers a massive hideout. After taking it down with him, we could finally take on the gym leader Price and get the 7th gym badge. Before our next stop though, we had to go back to Goldenrod City. Why? Well, if you were playing this game for the first time, you would have no idea, because apparently Team Rocket took over the radio tower in Goldenrod City and we have to stop them. Literally no piece of required dialogue would hint at this in Mahogany Town, but anyway, we head back to Goldenrod City and fight our way through the tower. Eventually, we take down the director of Team Rocket, who can't seem to stop glazing Giovanni, and he decides to disband the team for good. After this, we also get the Rainbow Wing, which will be important later. Now we could finally go through the Ice Path and into Blackthorn City. Here we could battle the 8th gym leader Claire and get our last badge, or at least that's if she would actually give it to us. Instead, she cries about how we're not actually worthy of taking on the Elite Four or something and tells us to go into the Dragon's Den to talk with some old dudes. This guy asks us a couple of questions before Claire walks in and cries some more about losing to us, but at the end of the day we got the badge and also a Dratini here. With our 8 badges collected, we were asked to go fight the Kimono girls to test if we are truly worthy of summoning the legendary Pokemon Ho-Oh. We also learned that these girls have been watching us since we left home to see if we were a trainer with a pure heart. After defeating them, we were finally able to go to the top of the bell tower and summon Ho-Oh. Now that we completed all 8 gyms and caught Ho-Oh, we could finally head to Victory Road. While I'd like to save some of my criticism of the game towards the end of the video, I can't help but bring something up here. This Victory Road is one of the shortest in all of Pokemon, and that wouldn't be a problem if the Pokemon weren't incredibly underleveled. Genuinely, the most efficient way you can train a team of 6 to be high enough level for the Elite Four is by fighting them over and over again, because these wild Pokemon give no EXP. We'll talk more about the leveling issue later, but for now we can take on the Elite Four, and it was actually a lot harder than I thought. Since I spent so much time grinding the Elite Four for levels, I did understand how a lot of the members fought, but even so, when I went in for my real run, there were moments where I could have lost. Honestly, the biggest problem was the beginning and the end of the Elite Four. The first of them was Will, and his team either gets completely wiped or will stall you out until you lose with his Slowbro. Next is Koga, and his team is actually not very good to be honest, especially against my Espeon and Typhlosion. I will say though, his Muck can be a problem if you let him set up a few minimizes and he toxics your whole team. Next is Bruno, who probably is the easiest one here to defeat just because we had several super effective moves against his Pokemon. Last of the Elite Four is Karen, who probably is the hardest to deal with if you don't have a good answer for her Houndoom. Finally, Lance is the champion and his team is certainly not easy to deal with. He leads with Gyarados, instantly intimidating your Pokemon, but he also has an Aerodactyl he tends to switch into, and that thing is a monster. If you let it live too long, it will wipe your team with Rock Slide. He also has a Charizard, but that isn't even the worst of our worries. With 3 Dragonites, if you don't have any good ice moves, you might as well just quit the game. Fortunately, I had constructed my team with this fight in mind, and having Lapras here especially helped. And after beating Lance's team, we could finally call ourselves champion. Now, I am aware of the extensive post-game once you become champion. However, this version of Kanto is largely bare bones, and its only real allure is the fact that you can challenge the gym leaders here. I know some places have changed, and that's really cool, don't get me wrong, but to say that this is any groundbreaking news would be overdoing it. The best part of Kanto is finally being able to get a bunch of the new Pokemon that were for some reason locked off from Johto. But as for the main story, look, this game has really high highs and really low lows. Some of my favorite parts include things like that amazingly composed music, the stunning visuals, and the deep influence of Japanese culture on Johto. I mean, if this game had one thing that defined it, it would be atmosphere. You can tell that the developers put their all into this remake. I mean, from walking with your Pokemon to even the most minute details of the sounds of a lake, there is quality control everywhere. The biggest issues with this game lie within the fundamental problems with Johto as a whole, and if you played through this region before, you know that it's the leveling. The fact that you could have like 6 gym badges and still be running into level 14 Pokemon is insane. I mean, honestly, I know it's frowned upon to run through a Pokemon game with just one Pokemon, but in this game it's halfway encouraged. I had to do so much grinding just to be able to defeat the Elite Four, and comparing that to almost any of the other Pokemon games I've played, well, it's the worst one in that aspect. I will say though, when you take into account the amount of love put into this game and how many hours you can get out of it, Pokemon Heart Gold is actually good. It's just not the same game that I remember it being as a kid. But you know what? That's fine. I think it's okay to admit when you've been blinded by nostalgia, because it makes room to enjoy other things. After this playthrough, I can say that these games aren't the greatest in the series, and I prefer titles such as Pokemon Emerald and Pokemon Black 2. But regardless of how I feel, I won't forget how much this game meant to me and so many other Pokemon fans. Pokemon Emerald is one of those games that has both a lot of fans and a lot of haters. While some love it for just how much it brought to the series, others feel as if it's somewhat overrated. It's not just Pokemon Emerald though. Generation 3 is a divisive group of games in and of itself. The fact that 1/3 of the game takes place over water and the ridiculous amount of HMs required to advance the story turns a lot of people off to the Hoenn region. When I was growing up though, Hoenn didn't really enter my rotation of Pokemon games until Omega Ruby came out. After all, I grew up with the DS as my main console. It's not that I didn't play the older games at the time though. In fact, Fire Red was and is one of my favorite games in the whole series. It's just somehow Emerald has always eluded me. But recently I decided it was time to finally be cultured in the original Hoenn region and find out if Pokemon Emerald was as good as people made it out to be. And let me tell you, things got interesting. Honestly, I think my perspective is pretty unique when it comes to this particular game because of how much I love Omega Ruby. I mean, you would think that these two games would share the same region wouldn't be that different, right? Well, let me take you through Pokemon Emerald to find out the answer to that question. Our journey begins in the ultra-nostalgic town of Littleroot. Gen 3 starts you off in a somewhat unique way compared to the previous generations, since you first appear inside of a moving van. But the moment you step out, you're greeted by this music. When you hear this, it's almost like you don't even want to leave and start your journey. I suppose this is a fitting feeling for the current situation. After all, leaving home can be a bittersweet experience. I myself have recently been away from home for the first time in a while, and it's both exciting and terrifying for me. Anyway, Emerald quickly differentiates itself from the rest of the Pokemon games because here you actually have a dad. In fact, the whole reason why you moved to the Hoenn region in the first place is probably so you can be closer to Norman, the Petalburg gym leader, and your father. While this might not seem significant now, this plot point already makes this game feel a lot more real. You're not just some kid from a random town, you're the child of one of the best trainers in the Hoenn region, and it's time for you to finally begin your journey. Of course, being familiar with the starters in this this game, I chose the best option, Mudkip, a Pokemon who holds type advantages over several difficult fights in the game while eventually becoming one of the strongest dual typings in all of Pokemon, only being weak to grass type moves. Now that we're leaving Littleroot, I should probably mention that I played Emerald through an emulator, hence the use of the fast forward mechanic. The beginning section of this game is quite similar to Gen 1 and Gen 2, since you have to go through a few routes in a small town before reaching the first gym. It's nothing revolutionary, but nevertheless it is still executed well. When you enter Petalburg City, you meet your dad in the gym, where he basically says it's cool that you're becoming a trainer, and that's pretty much all he says actually. You also meet Wally for the first time, who at first appears to be a potential rival, although he seems to be plagued with some poor respiratory health. Of course, it's too early for you to challenge Norman, so you move on to the next route. Inside of Petalburg Forest, I decided to pick up a Shroomish to prepare for the first gym leader in Rustboro City. But before that though, we encounter one of the most interesting additions to the 3rd generation, double battling. We'll actually get more into that later in the video, because next I wanted to get straight into Rustboro City. And as you enter, one of my favorite songs from this game starts to play. Anyway, if we move on to the gym leader now, Roxanne is not much of a challenge for me. I mean, this only makes sense considering I had a Mudkip and a Shroomish to demolish her rock types. Oh, and I also got an Incada to put some HMs on and an Abra that will one day become a very useful member of the team. Heading out of Rustboro, we get into a little situation with an old man and his Wingull Pico. In return for helping him get his Pokemon back, he takes us across the sea to the location of the next gym, Dewford Town. Going into this, I assume that since Rustboro is so easy, this would also be. Well, I was wrong. Very, very wrong. Keep in mind, I grew up playing Pokemon as it was transitioning into being easy. Games like Omega Ruby really made things simple, so I wasn't expecting much in terms of difficulty here. In Emerald, the AI for the gym leaders was made to actually use proper battling strategy. It certainly is easy to beat them once you've gone through the game before, but for me, this was a completely blind run. Well, after many attempts, I was able to take down Brawly and get the 2nd gym badge. After this, I entered the Granite Cave to meet Steven Stone, the former champion of Hoenn. Also, I picked up an Aaron because I was told that it is very good, and at this point my team is looking pretty solid in terms of potential. Well, now it's time to head to the next city, Slateport. Here we encounter the first of 2 evil teams in this region, Team Aqua. Surprisingly, this huge city doesn't have a gym, so we quickly move on to the next area. Here we finally evolve our Abra into a Kadabra, the evolution which unfortunately will be its last due to the lack of trading I can do on my emulator. On the bright side, we also evolved Shroomish into a Breloom and headed to the next city, Mauville. Here you can get a bike. Now in this game, bicycles are a little different than before. You have the choice between the Mach Bike and the Acro Bike. The main difference between these is that the Acro Bike can do cool tricks and get into certain places, while the Mach Bike is just a lot faster. And although the Acro Bike seemed pretty cool, this thing is super slow, so I went ahead and got the Mach. Around this point in the playthrough, something really cool happened though. So, by the way, I was live streaming this entire run on my channel and someone donated $10 to me. I just thought that was cool to mention here because that's the first time anyone's ever done that for me. Anyway, there's also the next gym in this city, but first you have to battle Wally and basically prove to his uncle that he isn't capable of beating the gym leader. After this, you face the leader Watson and his electric types. At first glance, this might be a little scary, but considering that Marshtomp is half ground type, there was no issue with this fight. Moving on with the adventure, we head into Verdanturf Town. Now this musical track has to be up there with one of my favorites in the whole game and potentially whole series. It's just so nostalgic and peaceful sounding, fitting quite well with Verdanturf's theme being that of a clean and nature-filled town in the mountains. There isn't much to do here besides saying hi to Wally though, so we move on, eventually encountering the other evil team of the game, Team Magma. After making our way through the fiery path, we reach one of my favorite routes in all of Pokemon, Route 113. This place has a very unique concept, being that the white stuff in the air and on the grass isn't snow, it's volcanic ash. Moving along, we reach Meteor Falls, where we see some some more development between Team Aqua and Team Magma's story. But after this long journey to the next town, we finally enter Lava Ridge. Flannery, its fire-type gym leader, is pretty much a joke considering we have Marshtomp. Yeah, it's kinda anticlimactic how weak this gym is considering we had to go through like 5 different routes and 2 different towns to get here, but whatever. The next gym is one that we've been waiting for since the beginning of the game, Petalburg City Gym. As we learned at the start of the game, the gym leader is Norman, and his team is certainly a lot better than Flannery's. Most notably, his slacking is one of the most difficult to handle due to its high stats and level. But after defeating him, you gain access to the most important HM in all of the game, Surf. With this, you basically unlock the other half of the game. But before we head to the seas, we still have a gym to take care of on the mainland. On our way there, we clear the Weather Institute of Team Aqua, battle our rival, and get the HM Fly, which we can use after defeating the next gym leader. But when we arrive into Four Tree City, the gym seems to be blocked off by some invisible force, so we have no choice but to move on to the next route. Fortunately, we encounter Steven here, and he tells us that the invisible force is just a Kecleon, and he helps us reveal it with the Devon Scope. Now we can enter the Four Tree City Gym. The leader, Winona, would not be an easy opponent, however. Her team is stacked with solid Pokemon like Skarmory and Altaria. Let's just say this fight took a lot of tries to beat. After defeating her though, we were able to use Fly, which is great since we have a lot to do before the next gym. Of course, I wanted to stop in the next city, Lilycove. There is no gym here, but there's a huge department store and a rival battle. At this point in the game, things get really confusing though. Pokemon Emerald suffers from a problem a lot of older games have, that being just not explaining what you need to do next. Sure, sometimes it'll give you hints, but at a lot of points it just assumes you know where to go. I guess this has to do with this era of gaming being dominated by official handbooks and strategy guides. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have figured out what to do in this section without the internet. But anyway, you basically have to take down both evil teams' hideouts. This process is kinda long and annoying since you have to first go to Mount Pyre, then go to the Jagged Pass where Magma's hideout is, then go to Slateport, then go to Lilycove where Team Aqua's hideout is, and yeah, most of this stuff isn't even explained to you. Throughout this little journey, I also picked up a Gloom, which will eventually become a Blossom. After taking out the evil team's hideouts, it's finally time to set sail into the last third of the main story, taking place exclusively over water. Our first stop is Moss Deep City, where we have to take on the gym leaders Tate and Liza. Genuinely, this fight is really difficult, and thank goodness I have save states because running back through this gym is really annoying. I was able to defeat them after a few tries though, and moved on to defeat some Team Magma members with Steven. Now we head to the Seafloor Cavern using the newly acquired HM Dive. Here we see Kyogre awaken and disappear, very much like Groudon did when it was also awakened. Upon resurfacing on the water, heavy rains begin to pour across the Hoenn region. Steven emerges to tell us that he's heading to Sootopolis City to figure out the problem. Naturally, we have to head there too, but first I make a quick stop at Pacific Town so we have an easy place to fly to when I need to get back in the area. Upon arrival to Sootopolis, we see Groudon and Kyogre facing off. Steven tells us that we have to meet with the former gym leader of the city, Wallace, and he tells us that we need to find Rayquaza, who may be able to stop the chaos. The location of Rayquaza is Sky Pillar, a short surf away from Pacific Town. Before facing the dragon, I catch an Altaria, which will be our final party member in this run. I know, not quite 6 Pokemon, but that's just my style. After encountering Rayquaza, it descends upon Groudon and Kyogre, basically just scaring them into leaving. We could catch Rayquaza after this, but I think that using legendaries at this point is just unfair, so I'll save it for the postgame. Before continuing the journey, I went over to check out the game corner in this game, and to my surprise it's actually real casino games. Growing up, I'd always played the game corners with the made-up games like Voltorb Flip, but this one straight up had slots and roulettes. It's also extremely hard to win. Alright, getting back on track, we challenged the 8th and final gym leader in Sootopolis, Juan. Taking the place of Wallace, Juan posed little challenge to my team, and I easily obtained the 8th and last gym badge. All that was left in the main story was to get through Victory Road and challenge the Elite Four. Honestly, I was really confident going into this, even if I didn't know anything about it. I had a really solid team and a Blossom with an overpowered Solar Beam setup. My Aggron would be a defensive monster, Kadabra and Altaria could put out some good damage, and Marshtomp is just overpowered. So I went straight through the Elite Four and I was quickly humbled. I spent an entire live stream playing this game trying to get the Elite Four done, but I was just so incredibly underleveled and I couldn't do it. So I did some training off screen as much as I didn't want to and came back with a vengeance. Now I knew the Pokemon the Elite Four would use. I could properly send out the right matchups and more importantly, use the right moves. The first Elite Four member, Sydney, was no problem. Although he was a dark type trainer, he has 3 dual types which I had advantages over. After taking down Sydney, Phoebe was next with her ghost types. At first I thought this would be a problem because I didn't have too much to specifically counter them, but it turned out to not be so bad. I sent out Kadabra first to get some quick knockouts with Psychic, then I switched to Swampert to finish the job with Earthquake. With Phoebe out the way, we move on to the next fight, Glacia. Now if I'm being honest, this fight gets completely swept by Blossom Solar Beam. Yeah, this thing pretty much destroys any sort of water typing. But the last of the Elite Four would be a bit more of a challenge. Drake uses dragon types, who all have pretty solid movesets. While not exactly difficult, I definitely could have lost this fight if I didn't pay attention. I also made sure we had an ice type move so we could cover the dragon types, which was Blizzard on Swampert. With that, it was time to face the champion, Wallace. So actually going into this fight, I forgot to fully heal, which definitely put me at a disadvantage. The plan going out the gate was to set up Sunny Day and Solar Beam spam, but this Milotic somehow was able to tank one of those and really caused my team some problems when Tentacruel knocked out Blossom, Kadabra, Aggron, Altaria, and Blossom again. At this point, I just had to pray for a Swampert to tank anything Tentacruel had and knock it out with a strength. This wouldn't be the end of the challenges though, because Wallace sent out a Ludicolo that I let set up about 6 double teams. At this point, I was just praying for something to hit this guy, but fortunately, Blossom once again comes through and knocks it out with a Solar Beam. The Wishcash and Gyarados that Wallace sent out afterwards all got destroyed by Blossom, and I was able to become the new champion. I have to say, this victory was so satisfying, and I have to give it up to Blossom for being the undisputed MVP of this Elite Four run. Now that we've completed the main story, Emerald offers us one of the most expansive post-games in the franchise. There's obviously the plethora of legendary Pokemon to catch like Rayquaza, Groudon, Kyogre, but you also can't forget about Latios and Latias along with the Regis. I personally didn't go ahead and pick up all of these, but it's funny to think that to catch the Regis, you need to do such a specific set of tasks and manage to translate Braille. Latias was also kind of annoying to find since it's basically hidden in random places across the region and you just have to get kinda lucky enough to stumble upon it. You can certainly manipulate the game by going in and out of houses and running around in grass, but this did still take a while. As for the other post-game stuff, there's the Battle Frontier, which Omega Ruby did not have. Honestly, going into this, I didn't know what to expect besides just really difficult fights. To my surprise, the first fights I took on weren't really that difficult. I think that this is because you will progressively challenge better trainers as you win matches. I didn't really have the time to go through this whole frontier, but best believe if I was playing this game in the early 2000s, I'd have put hundreds of hours in here. With that being said, that was pretty much my whole experience playing through Emerald for the first time, and let me tell you, it was amazing. These days I've been really unimpressed with Pokemon games. Like, I guess they aren't that bad in terms of just being generally decent games, but they don't really have that charm like they used to. Emerald feels like the developers were really trying their hardest to put their heart and soul into the experience. The battling is actually challenging and the storyline is pretty significant, at least for a Pokemon game. I also have to give it up to the region design here. A lot of people don't like Hoenn because of how much of the game takes place over water, and yes, that is somewhat annoying if you don't have repels, but besides that, it's actually quite nice. I mean, if you look into what Hoenn is actually based on in real life, then everything starts to make a lot more sense. All of the cities in the game feel like real, lived-in places. I mean, just look at Four Tree City or Pacifidlog Town. These both have distinct cultures in which the people live by. Pacifidlog Town was founded by fishermen and divers. Four Tree City is inhabited by strong and healthy people who live inside of the trees connected by rope bridges. It's hard to find cities like this in modern Pokemon games. In fact, it feels like they're too realistic these days. Ever since Pokemon left the Japan-inspired regions in Gen 5, they slowly began to make the cities much like their real-life counterparts. This wasn't really an issue at all in Gen 5 because they did it in a very passionate way, Castelia City was literally a carbon copy of New York City, but they still had a lot to do in it. When you go through some cities in Scarlet and Violet, for example, there's barely anyone to talk to or houses to go in. There's always exceptions, and I think that games like X and Y and Sun and Moon still had some decent cultural elements to them. It's just a lot less than it used to be. Emerald had its whole storyline and region interwoven. The concepts of nature took center stage with beautiful towns like Verdanturf and Lava Ridge being completely unique due to their surroundings. Aside from Emerald's amazing region design, it also introduced a lot into the series. Perhaps the most notable addition was double battling. To be honest, this wasn't obviously new to me since I grew up with the later generations, but well, let's just say Pokemon Emerald isn't exactly shy with making a lot of the required fights double battles. I mean, even one of the gyms is a double battle. Emerald also introduced the idea of 2 evil teams in one game, something basically no other games in the future would take on. I'm not sure why they stopped doing this because the dynamic between Team Aqua and Magma is amazing. I also really love how this game makes the defeat of evil teams a lot more realistic. Instead of just losing to a child and disbanding, Team Aqua and Magma actively continue their pursuit of their goals, even succeeding to an extent. Their defeat comes in the form of a lesson in not trying to play God and manipulate the legendary Pokemon to create more land or sea. In my opinion, this is a huge step up from Team Rocket in the previous regions. Overall, I think Pokemon Emerald is perhaps the most underrated game in the series. I can't say for sure if I like it more than Omega Ruby, partly because of nostalgia admittedly, but perhaps it's better to not compare these games at all in the first place since they came out in drastically different eras of Pokemon. Omega Ruby isn't going to provide you with much challenge in battling, and there's not even a battle frontier in the first place, but it can still bring you the best version of Gen 3's music. Emerald, on the other hand, has the traditional charm of a Pokemon game mixed with the genuinely challenging battle system. It's far from perfect though, and things like the overuse of HMs and the lack of a physical special split for moves really drag me down at times. But besides that, Emerald is as good as its die-hard fans would want you to believe, and if you haven't gotten a chance to play it for yourself, go ahead and try it. You certainly will not regret it. Pokemon Platinum is one of the most interesting games in the franchise. Despite technically being the same game as Diamond and Pearl, the Pokemon community ranks Platinum far ahead of the two. As someone who hasn't played any of the Gen 4 games previously, this kind of confused me, but I figured that this might have been a similar situation to Pokemon Crystal and Pokemon Emerald, in the sense that Platinum is really just a significantly enhanced version of the originals. But of course, I couldn't really know for sure unless I played Platinum myself. I was well aware of the issues with Diamond and Pearl already. Slow pacing, bad team building, and a lackluster plot. But besides that, I didn't know much about Platinum. My only experience with the game was through YouTube videos and PokeMMO. So I decided it was time to do a playthrough for myself and find out if this game was actually that good. I mean, it seems like everywhere I look on the internet, fans of Platinum really swear by it being the best game. But before we begin, I have to make one little disclaimer. This game is being played on an emulator. While yes, it does make it easier to record, it also has to do with a huge issue this game suffers from. It just runs kinda slowly. I know it significantly improved the speed of gameplay from Diamond and Pearl, and that is really bad, but Platinum still feels slow to me. So if you're wondering why all the footage in this video is in like 5 times its normal speed, that's why. Anyway, let's begin. In this game, much like the others, the professor gives you and your rival your first Pokemon. I decided to go with Chimchar because of the lack of fire types in Gen 4. It's kind of funny, Platinum really only has like 4 options for fire types, but that's actually an improvement from Diamond and Pearl, which had like 2. I guess it's fitting since Sinnoh is supposed to be taking place in the northernmost part of Japan, but then again, Dawn wears a super high skirt when it's supposed to be really cold, so I guess anything goes. Anyway, after losing a battle to our rival Barry's Piplup, we quickly learn how good the Pokemon Platinum soundtrack is. After this, we head to Professor Rowan's lab and start our journey to collect all 8 gym badges and become the champion, but not before being forced to say bye to your mom. But now it's time to head for the first gym. But before that, we meet a suspicious man named Looker who says he's a member of the International Police and asks you to keep an eye out for bad guys. Right after this, we meet Barry again for another battle. This time though, I didn't lose. I also caught a Bidoof because, well, this game requires a lot of HMs and this thing can learn damn near all of them. Also, before we got to the next gym, our Chimchar evolved into a Monferno, making the gym battle a lot easier. We then head back to Jubilife City where we're introduced to the main villains of this region, Team Galactic, a group that is terrorizing Floroma Town and Valley Windworks just up ahead. While not much to do in Floroma Town besides smell the roses and slather some honey on a tree, Valley Windworks holds one of the most annoying fights in all of Pokemon, Team Galactic Commander Mars. Well, maybe it's not that bad, but her Purugly is quite strong and can roll through your team if you're not paying attention. I also wonder how she even got a Purugly because it's not supposed to evolve into that until like 20 levels later. But after clearing Team Galactic from the area, our next stop is through Eterna Forest. I'll tell you what, no matter what I think about this game after I'm done, its soundtrack is at least the top 3 in the franchise. Oh, and also shout out to this game occasionally having partners that heal you as you progress through a location. Moving on, we reach Eterna City and meet Cynthia and destroy the second gym. On the way to the next gym though, I spent way too long trying to catch a perfect nature and ability Gligar, which I didn't even end up getting. Oh, and Monferno evolved into Infernape. Now I'm not sure if it's just me, but it seems like this game gives you a lot more EXP than the others. Maybe I'm wrong though, I don't know. Oh, also, we encounter Cyrus again, you know, that guy from the start of the game, and he strangely monologues about things that don't really make sense. But we eventually reach Hearthome City, or is it Hearthome City? I don't know, and take down the third gym leader with ease. Honestly, if this over-leveling of Infernape keeps up, I don't know how challenging this game is going to be. Before we leave though, I gotta shout out Amity Square for introducing the concept of Pokemon following behind you, something that would be fully fledged out in Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver. After this, we head out to Salacion Town and explore its strange ruins. There isn't much to do here besides that though, so we move on through Route 215 and into Veilstone City. Now this place is pretty huge and we'll be coming back here later, but first we have to take down the next gym leader, Maylene, and once again, it was super easy. Next, we head to Pastoria City to challenge Crasher Wake's gym. Now, since he specializes in water types, I thought this would be kinda hard, you know, since I have Infernape, a fire type. But actually, it wasn't so bad since I was so incredibly overleveled. And then Team Galactic detonated a bomb. Since this is a Pokemon game, we try and figure out what the problem is, even though we're just a child. And after chasing down the guy who exploded something, we kinda just let him go. He even says that he wishes he got to use the bomb at the lake. You know, you would think we would chase him down, but I guess Cynthia would rather just talk to us. I wonder if this will backfire later in the game. Anyway, Cynthia gives us something to get past a group of Psyducks that was blocking our path a while ago, and we move on to Celestic Town. Oh, and also I caught a Swablu that will soon become an Altaria. There isn't really that much to do in this town. There is Cyrus though, and we quickly take care of him and move on towards the next gym. Now that we can use Surf, we can go across into Canalave City. Or is it Canalave? I don't really know, to be honest. These names are kinda tricky. But when you first enter, you are greeted with calming music and a pleasant view of the river. As I was saying, this city has a really nice theme, and it made me actually let go of the fast forward button just to listen for a bit. Regardless, we took care of the gym steel types and head to Iron Island to get an egg that would eventually hatch into Riolu. Then we meet Barry, Lucas, and Professor Rowan in in this city's library. that's when the most unexpected thing ever happens. Team Galactic detonated a bomb at one of the lakes? If only we knew about this earlier. Well, at least we go check out the situation and figure out that Team Galactic had already captured the 2 lake Pokemon from Lake Valor and Verity. Oh, and the lake Pokemon are just these guys. The last lake we need to check out though is Acuity, but that is located really far away. We have to go all the way through Mount Coronet, Route 216, and Route 217. Oh, and also, there's a blizzard going on this whole time, meaning that in all your battles it will be hailing, and in the overworld you move really slow. This is footage of me fast forwarding through the area, and it's still kinda slow. Honestly, if I had to play through this game on a normal console, I would be a little annoyed. Anyway, before we can use Rock Climb to get to the lake where Barry already is, we have to beat the next gym leader in Snowpoint City. After solving one of the most annoying puzzles in the game, we do reach Lake Acuity, and unfortunately we are too late. The last lake Pokemon had already been taken, and we're left with no choice but to go to Team Galactic's headquarters ourselves. After battling through the building, we stumble upon Cyrus giving a speech to Team Galactic, but when we find him after the speech, he reveals that he doesn't care at all about his people and he wants to create a new world for his own purposes. Yeah, this dude's crazy. Even worse though, after we beat him in a battle, we discover that Team Galactic has been doing some really shady stuff in their lab. But all we can do now is free the 3 lake Pokemon and try and stop Cyrus. In order to reach him, we need to get through the rest of Mount Coronet and defeat some galactic commanders. But right as we reach Cyrus, he had already begun summoning the legendary Pokemon Dialga and Palkia. But just as he thinks that he's about to destroy the world and remake it, he is taken to the Distortion world by a mysterious shadowy Pokemon. This place is unique to Pokemon Platinum, and it is one of the most interesting places in the series. The music is eerie and the visuals are even creepier. But after solving some puzzles with the lake Pokemon, we challenge Cyrus for the last time and face the shadow Pokemon Giratina. I spent an ungodly amount of time trying to catch this thing, and after a while I just decided to use the Master Ball. But now that we have foiled Cyrus's plans and caught the legendary Pokemon, it's time to resume our journey to become champion. Our last gym badge is in Sunyshore City, but before we take it on, let's catch up with our team. I evolved Gligar into Gliscor, Riolu into Lucario, and I caught a Gible which evolved into a Gabite. Oh, and also in this game you can get a free Eevee, so I went ahead and chose to get a Vaporeon. In Sunyshore we take care of Volknar's electric types and prepare for Victory Road. Before leaving though, we encountered Jasmine, a gym leader from the Johto region who gives us yet another HM. In this Victory Road we are required to use 5 different HMs. This has really got to be my least favorite part about this game. I shouldn't have to bench half of my team to get through this place. But eventually we reach the Pokemon League. One problem though, we're kind of under-leveled. I mean, we don't even have Garchomp yet. Okay, that's more like it. Going into this, I fully expected Infernape to carry us to victory. I mean, he was more than 10 levels higher than the rest of my team. And for the most part, he did carry. I can't lie though, Vaporeon and Garchomp did put in some work. Oh, also, Gliscor ended up basically being useless in almost all of these fights because all of his good moves either needed to be relearned or taught via TM. Anyway, it was time to finally challenge the supposed hardest champion in the franchise, Cynthia. She sends out Spiritomb, which at first seems scary because it has no weaknesses, but I used Flare Blitz to hit it hard and knock it out. Next, we had to deal with her Milotic, which was stronger than expected, taking out a few members of our team until Vaporeon was able to take it down. Then we sent out Infernape, who was able to easily take care of Roserade. Cynthia then sent out Togekiss, who somehow was able to knock out my Infernape, but in response I sent out a Garchomp. Unfortunately though, after taking down Togekiss, Cynthia decided to make us look silly and one-shot us with her own Garchomp. Fortunately for us though, we have Vaporeon, who completely counters it, and all Cynthia has left is her fairly weak Lucario, which we one-shot. And that's it. While Cynthia certainly had a great team, mine was just better. Even if Gliscor was basically useless for anything besides Sand Attack and U-Turn, we won. And yeah, we're the champion. So with that out of the way, is Platinum as good as they say it is? Yeah, look, I did not have very high expectations of this game going in, honestly. Despite all of the support this game gets from its fans, the 4th generation of Pokemon is one that often goes under the radar when discussing the best Pokemon games of all time, often overshadowed by games like Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver and Black and White 2. While these games get mostly praised by the community, Diamond and Pearl gave somewhat of a bad impression of Gen 4 to the community. However, I can't help but feel like Platinum is actually a bit underrated. I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty big Pokemon fan, and I grew up playing these games religiously. I just find it kind of surprising to see how many people also have missed out on this game. I'd even go as far to say that a lot of people's first experience with Gen 4 was through Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which kinda sucks since those are remakes of the inferior games. I mean, I haven't played through BDSP myself, but I can assume based on what I've seen that the remakes aren't even that good either. Ultimately, it feels like the 4th generation as a whole got the short end of the stick when it comes to the DS Pokemon games. I wonder how the reputation of Gen 4 would have been if the only game in that generation was Platinum, because almost all of the problems that Diamond and Pearl had were in some way or another fixed in Platinum. Truthfully, I believe that this game should receive the same amount of respect that Emerald gets in terms of how much it improved on the originals. The amount of options you had in Platinum was actually some of the best in the whole franchise at that point. While my particular run of the game wasn't very challenging, perhaps due to the over-leveling of Infernape, I could see the potential the game has for difficulty. In fact, I used to watch Nuzlockes of Pokemon Platinum just because it was fascinating to see how players would handle how well enemy teams are built in this game. Also, there were 59 new Pokemon made available during the main story, not to mention the several unique Pokemon you get for free, including Togepi, Porygon, Rotom, and Eevee. Plenty of new content was added besides this though. There were brand new characters like Looker and Cheren who provided a lot in terms of story development. I mean, Looker was such a fan favorite that they kept adding him into future games. Cyrus had his entire personality turned up to the max and really made him out to be a crazy power-hungry tyrant. The addition of the Distortion world really added to that ominous vibe that Cyrus brought with his speeches. Like, imagine yourself as a little kid and reading Cyrus talking about ending this world, and then you enter the Distortion world and hear this music. And even in terms of quality of life and graphical changes, Platinum doesn't disappoint. The main characters have slightly different outfits where they actually wear long sleeves and don't pretend like it isn't cold outside. Well, except for Dawn, she still doesn't wear pants. The speed of the game is also dramatically increased in Platinum. I mean, just look at a side-by-side comparison of how fast you can surf in the two versions. Yeah, that's slow alright. And another really cool thing that doesn't change that much, but it's still cool, is the addition of a little animation when you send out your Pokemon. I mean, it is just one extra frame, but that probably took a while to make for every single Pokemon. Ultimately, I feel like Pokemon Platinum brought a lot to the table in terms of classic Pokemon games. It didn't do anything crazy like adding a whole new dex of Pokemon like Gen 5 did, but it still innovated in its own way. The soundtrack was put together with an incredible amount of attention to detail, highlighting the sentimental nature of the story. Even the dialogue between characters is a lot more mature than some of the other entries in the series. Team building started to really get interesting in Platinum too, since we had access to so many different kinds of Pokemon from other regions besides Sinnoh. I feel like with the DS era of Pokemon, competitive battling really started to get taken seriously, especially with the Battle Frontier being a big part of the postgame. And while not something Platinum specifically introduced, the physical special split of moves in Pokemon had to be one of the best additions to the franchise out of the 4th generation. While Game Freak would begin to experiment a little more with the direction of the series after this game, Platinum is in that nice middle area where you had a game with great gameplay, art, music, and pretty much everything in general. So if you're ever bored of replaying the same Pokemon games over and over again, give Platinum a try. It's the best way to experience the 4th generation of Pokemon. Generation 5 is the peak of the Pokemon franchise. At least that's what many of us fans believe now. But if we look back on the release of Pokemon Black and White, it seems like opinions were a lot more mixed than we might remember. But of course, this wasn't for no reason. These games made a lot of major changes to the typical Pokemon formula, and hardcore fans were not happy. For one, the entire regional dex of Unova was limited to 156 new Pokemon, meaning until the post-game you could simply not obtain any Pokemon from previous generations generations. Along with this, the region of Unova takes place in a loose representation of New York instead of the typical regions of Japan. These changes set the stage for a soft reboot of the series, and it seems like Nintendo was hoping to revitalize the franchise to levels never seen before. Unfortunately though, the results of the Gen 5 experiment were an initial failure, but I don't really mean this in the commercial sense, because these games did do really well on the market despite being one of the lower selling entries in the franchise. The failure of these games comes in the form of the community's response. I distinctly remember as a child seeing YouTube videos harshly criticizing these games on release. Perhaps the worst of these criticisms were the bad design allegations, basically claiming that this game had the worst Pokemon design in the franchise because they made a trash bag and an ice cream cone into Pokemon. Looking back now, we can see how ridiculous these claims were because the first generation of Pokemon had literal sludge, eggs, and a racial stereotype as Pokemon. At least in Generation 5, the silly Pokemon had correlation with the region's culture. Aside from design complaints, people also didn't like how you couldn't use any other region's Pokemon in the main story. Look, as someone who is guilty of using Gyarados many times throughout the first few Pokemon games, I get it. But I don't think it's fair to criticize Gen 5 for this. We should look at Pokemon Black and White as standalone games, just like any of the other titles, and decide for ourselves how fun the gameplay actually is. Nostalgia is important, but the whole point of this release was to give the series a reboot, but I don't think fans of the series were ready for that at the time. I always enjoyed these games as a kid and beyond, but it's been a while since I've last played through Black and White, so I decided it was time to do another run. This time trying to determine if Pokemon Black and White were actually good games, or if the criticism on release was rightfully deserved. This game opens with an incredibly cinematic cutscene, instantly setting the foundation for this being a much more story-driven adventure than ever before. Once we start the game, we're greeted by Professor Juniper, who has surprisingly detailed calf muscles, and we get to choose our character. This time, we can actually see what they look like before we choose. Once we've selected them, we're greeted with a really nice opening cinematic of our town before meeting our two rivals/childhood friends. We get straight into picking our Pokemon and battling though, so I decided to go with Oshawott. After losing to Bianca and beating Sharon, we head to meet with Professor Juniper, who teaches us how to catch Pokemon. But after this, we truly begin our journey and head through Route 1 to Accumula Town. First things first, I noticed that this was the first game they fused the Pokemart and Pokecenter, something I started to take for granted in new games. But besides that, we get introduced to the evil team of the Unova region, Team Plasma, and its leader Getsis. He basically goes on about how Pokemon need to be liberated from humans in order to truly be free. Because how can we call Pokemon our partners or friends if we have full control over them? I have to say, this scene really separates them from the other traditional evil teams of Pokemon, because if we think about it, their goal isn't inherently evil as far as we know. I mean, in old games like Pokemon Platinum, Cyrus literally wanted to reset the universe just because he didn't like his life. In Gen 1, Team Rocket was literally just a criminal organization. Team Plasma though, they have potential, or maybe that's just what Getsis' speech is constructed to make you believe. After the speech, a mysterious trainer named N confronts us and claims that he can hear our Pokemon talking. He challenges us to a battle and afterwards says that if Pokemon are confined to Pokeballs, they cannot become perfect beings. Well, all that was surprisingly philosophical for a Pokemon game, but it's time to continue on through the adventure. Before going through Route 2, we get stopped by our mom, who gives us some shoes that allow us to finally run. But after a rival battle with Bianca, we reach Striaton City, where we can finally challenge the first gym leader, Salon. This gym is unique because the leader you face depends on what starter you picked. Despite the type disadvantage, we were able to beat him with the help of the Fire Monkey Pokemon we got from a random person in the Dream Yard. After we get the first gym badge, we head straight back to the Dream Yard and discover Team Plasma just randomly beating up a baby Pokemon. I guess it is kinda obvious that these guys are not good people. Alright, it's time to move on to the next route where we encounter Team Plasma once again, who are now stealing Pokemon from preschool children. I mean, come on, you really want us to believe that these guys have a point? I don't know. But after evolving our Oshawott into Duat, we easily take them down and continue on to Nacrene City to take on the next gym leader, Lenora. Oh, and Team Plasma once again makes an appearance and steals the skull off of this skeleton. So yeah, we chase them down into this forest and get ready to enter the best looking place in any Pokemon game during the 2D era. Sky Arrow Bridge is an absolute showcase of what the DS is capable of visually, and this isn't even the end of the spectacle. Castelia City is Pokemon's take on New York City, and let me tell you, they did it justice. For context, this region takes place in a rough depiction of New York / New Jersey / Connecticut. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's relatively accurate in certain places. But when it comes to Castelia City, it's not hiding its New York influence. From the incredible amount of people running through the streets to the hidden cafes and back alleys, this place has it all. But most importantly for us now, it has a gym. First though, we have to do some other stuff. Team Plasma once again has been causing trouble here and we have to expel them from the city. After we do that, we head to the gym and face Berg and get the 3rd gym badge. Well, as great as Castelia City is, it's already time to leave and we're headed to the desert. But first, we have to battle Bianca and Cheren again. And I'd also like to point out, I believe this game has the most rival fights in the entire series. I really do like that since it feels like you really are all going on a journey together. But anyway, here we catch the official 2nd permanent party member, Sandile, and go train at the desert resort. I'd also like to mention how awesome these healers are in this game. In almost every route, there's at least one NPC that will fully heal your team. This has to be one of my favorite additions in this game since running back and forth between Pokemon centers and routes has always been a problem. Anyway, it's time to finally explore Nimbasa City, home of the Pokemon musical and many other entertainment attractions. Ironically though, we get a really touching scene with Bianca and her dad where we can see the realities of how a parent feels seeing their child leaving home for the first time. This game really does touch on some deeper subjects. Speaking of which, we meet N here and he invites us on a ride on the Ferris wheel. How nice. Except it's not really for fun because he tells us he's the king of Team Plasma and he's working with Ghetsis to save the Pokemon. Naturally, he battles us afterward too, and this battle is certainly not the one we should be worried about because we have to fight Gym Leader Elisa next, and she is quite strong. The only reason I was able to beat her was because my Duat is 10 levels over her Pokemon. Anyway, we move on to the next route and meet the current champion of the region, Alder. He drops some philosophical knowledge onto Cheren and I before we battle some preschoolers and evolve our Duat into Samurott and Sandile into Krokorok. After this, we cross the Driftvale drawbridge and make it to Driftvale City. Much like every other town in the game, Team Plasma has been causing trouble and we have to stop them. So we kick them out of the cold storage and witness the gym leader get tricked into letting some of their associates go. I guess that's not really his or our problem right now anyway though, because we have a gym battle to face. Of course though, this fight is not an issue since we have our overpowered Samurott to sweep him. Alright, next stop is through the Chargestone Cave where, man, N is literally everywhere we go. Anyway, he tells us that we were chosen, whatever that means, but we go ahead through the cave and evolve our Krokorok into Krookodile. Oh, and we also catch Ferroseed, our 3rd permanent party member. After getting through the cave, we reach Mistralton City, home of the next gym, although we have some other business to attend to beforehand. The gym leader Skyla meets us at the top of the Celestial Tower and asks us to ring a bell. Okay, now she'll let us battle her. Oh, we also picked up a Litwick here, our 4th permanent team member. We quickly beat Skyla and meet N outside the gym. He asks our Pokemon what they think of us, and to his surprise, they actually like us. This completely challenges N's philosophy of Pokemon having an abusive relationship with humans. We keep it moving though and reach Twist Mountain, which is really cool during the winter. After this, we make it to Isura City, which again looks really cool during the winter. We're quickly able to take on the gym leader Bryson here, but we have no time to celebrate since we're forced to go to Dragon Spiral Tower to meet N. Here, we evolve our Ferroseed into Ferrothorn, and at the top of the tower, we see the legendary Pokemon Zekrom, or Reshiram if you're playing white version, being summoned by N. After this, we clear Team Plasma out of the Relic Castle way back in the Desert Resort, then get entrusted with the other stone to summon the box legendary Pokemon. Oh, and while we're back in Nacrene City, we turn the fossil we got in the Relic Castle into our 5th permanent team member, Tirtuga. And actually after this, we go ahead and catch an Axew to complete our team. Now it's time to go ahead to the next city, but first we have a rival battle with Bianca and cross the Tube-Line Bridge. Here, Ghetsis awaits us and basically stops trying to pretend like he's some great guy. He knows we want to stop his plan and is confident that N will be able to fulfill his dream of releasing all Pokemon from their trainers. Once we reach Opelucid City, we catch him spreading misinformation with Team Plasma, but all we can do now is challenge the 8th and final gym leader, Drayden. Oh, by the way, this city and gym leader will be different depending on your version of the game. If you play Pokemon Black version like me, Opelucid will be futuristic and the gym leader will be Drayden. If you play White version, it will be traditional and the gym leader will be Iris. Regardless, the battles are the same and we finally have all 8 gym badges. Now we can go through one of my favorite routes of all time, Route 10. Here we evolve Tirtuga into Caracosta and our Litwick all the way into a Chandelure. After Route 10, we go through the badge gates and enter Victory Road, where we fully complete our team by evolving Axew all the way to Haxorus. Now it's time to face the Elite Four. In this game, you can face them in any order you'd like. So first, I faced Marshall, who has a pretty solid fighting type team that definitely gave me a challenge. My Haxorus was just too strong though, and we took him down. Next, I challenged Chantal and her ghost types, which we handled quite well using our wide variety of Pokemon. After this, I faced Grimsley and his dark types, who definitely put up a fight. Considering his Crocodile has Earthquake, this definitely could have gotten bad here, but with our sheer number of Pokemon, we took him down. Finally, I challenged Caitlin's psychic types, who definitely could have been dangerous, we just had the type advantage with Crocodile's dark type moves. With the Elite Four out of the way, it was time to face the champion Alder, or at least that was the plan until N destroyed his team and summoned a huge castle. With no other real option here, we follow N into the castle until we're confronted by Team Plasma's 6 sages. But we aren't alone. All of the gym leaders except for Solange, Chile, and Cress come to help us. As we make our way through the castle, we encounter N's childhood companions Anthea and Concordia, who heal our Pokemon and tell us about N. Apparently, he had been raised completely isolated from the real world and fed propaganda that Pokemon are only abused by trainers. With this in mind, we unfortunately have to battle N despite him not really being our enemy. He summons Zekrom and we summon Reshiram, and it's time for the final battle to save the world from releasing all of their Pokemon. N's team is strong despite him only using Pokemon for individual battles at a time. His Klinklang is especially difficult to handle if you don't have type advantage over it, but honestly, he isn't all that difficult and we defeat him. Of course though, we couldn't be foolish enough to expect that this is the real final battle. Ghetsis walks in and tells us N is his son, and that he had no intentions of actually freeing Pokemon for a noble reason, but instead so he can rule the region being the only one to hold Pokemon. And now he's decided to take matters into his own hands. This is the real final battle. His team is stronger than N's, especially with his Electros that has the Levitate ability. Luckily for us, we have a legendary Pokemon on our side combined with a really solid team, so we take him down after a hard-fought battle and save the world. N decides that he was wrong in his thinking and decides to leave to decide what he wants to do with his life. And with that, the credits roll. Now with all that being said, this game is far from over, and its post-game is one of the franchise's best. You unlock the entire other half of the region along with the national dex, finally allowing you to catch other regions' Pokemon. I think that this post-game is probably big enough to get a video of its own, but just know that there's a lot to do here. In terms of the main game though, what did I think of it? Well, it's certainly as good as I remember. First of all, let's talk about region design. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of how linear this game is, and you know, I understand. Here's the thing though, if you want a good story in a Pokemon game, sacrifices have to be made. If this was so open like other games, it would be a lot more narratively messy. This game's linearity is what allows us to go on this adventure side by side with our childhood friends while progressively taking down Team Plasma until the big climax at the end. In basically every town or city, Team Plasma is either engaging in criminal activity or spreading propaganda, so by the time we do get to that big endpoint, it feels like this has been a long time coming. Moments like the gym leaders coming together to help you get past the sages, N riding the Ferris wheel with you, and Bianca's emotional argument with her dad comes to mind as super memorable moments in the game. Black and White isn't afraid to speak on some real philosophical issues like the morality of Pokemon, which was surprising at first but a welcome addition story-wise. Oh, and as for the actual Pokemon designs themselves, I don't hate them at all. Anyone who was saying bad stuff about them on release was literally just being biased, and you know what, in the sequels and the post-game they added Pokemon from more regions anyway, so I'm not complaining. In fact, I want to make a video specifically on Black and White 2 in the future, so subscribe if you want to see that. So is Black and White actually as good as everyone says it is? Yes, and if you haven't played the game yet, I highly recommend you do. Going through this game was a true trip down memory lane, and I'm glad to say it's just as good as it's always been. What do you think though? If you agree with me, leave a like on the video. If not, leave a comment telling me why not. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Pokemon Black and White 2 are often considered the best games in the franchise, but for me, I never played them. My Generation 5 experience was limited to the first set of games, which of course are amazing, but it always seemed like the sequels had something even greater to offer. Looking back now, Black and White 2 are obvious fan favorites that probably didn't get the recognition they deserved on release. Since these games were sequels, they were essentially doomed to sell significantly worse than the originals. In fact, they sold half as many copies as Black and White did. At first glance, you would think that the sequels had to be significantly worse in order for them to sell this poorly, but if we look closer, that's absolutely not the case. Not only do Pokemon fans agree that this game is amazing, but if we look at the other third entries in the franchise, they always perform poorly. Games like Pokemon Crystal, Emerald, and Platinum all performed commercially worse than their predecessors, and these games are typically agreed upon to be the best in their respective generation. Here's the thing though, these games were all basically the same as their originals. Sure, they had some changes to the story or gameplay, but fundamentally they were the same. Black and White 2 though, these were different. These games were completely new adventures. Yes, they took place in the same region of Unova, but besides that, there were tons of returning Pokemon roaming the region, new cities to explore, and an entirely new storyline. Despite this, these games were seen as your typical third installment in a generation, and therefore suffered commercially. Not to mention, there had been so many other Pokemon games on the DS, many people like myself couldn't afford to buy all of them. So naturally, the sequel or third installment to a game would take the back burner. But fast forward to now, I decided it was time to actually play the game for myself and see what the hype was all about. Did these games deserve to sell so poorly, or are they one of the most underrated Pokemon games of all time? And most importantly, was Pokemon Black and White 2 actually good? Our journey begins in the new Aspertia City, where we are informed that we're being delivered a Pokemon so we can start our journey. Along the way, we meet Hugh, who joins us as we go to meet Bianca, who brought the Unova starters. I choose Oshawott, and then Hugh also asks to get a Pokemon, in which he chooses Snivy. After a quick battle, we go to Route 1, meet the former champion Alder, who can somehow just jump off cliffs, and then head to Flossy Ranch. Here, we battle Hugh again and discover that one of the ranch's herdiers had gone missing. We eventually find it stolen by a Team Plasma member and we rescue it. Before leaving though, I caught Riolu and Mareep, members of the team that will stick with us for the whole playthrough. After this, we head back to Aspertia City to face the first gym leader, Sharon. Once we beat him, we head to Verbank City for the second gym. When we arrive, we see the gym leader Roxy telling her dad to not try and become a movie star. Kinda weird, but anyway, we go through the Verbank complex and eventually catch a Growlithe, another permanent team member. With 4 great Pokemon by our side, we face the second gym leader Roxy and her band members. During one of the fights, our Oshawott evolved into Duat, making this battle pretty easy. With 2 gym badges, I was ready to keep going on my journey, but before I could progress any further, I had to go through several minutes of boredom at Pokestar Studios. Basically, you have to see a crappy short film made by the former gym leader Bryson. Then you have to make the exact same film, except now you're the star of the show. Conceptually, this sounds pretty cool, but in reality, it's just weird and boring. The atmosphere of the studio is really nice though, but once we're done being a movie star, we have to take down more Team Plasma grunts causing trouble. After defeating them, we can finally go to the mainland of the Unova region by taking a boat to Castelia City. There isn't much new here at first glance, however there are a couple of cool places you can see. First of all, you can check out the Liberty Garden, which I'm pretty sure was an event exclusive place in Black and White. Next, there's actually a completely new location here, being the Castelia Sewers. Here there are a bunch of Team Plasma grunts being evil, and we also encounter a mysterious Team Plasma scientist named Colress. Besides that though, I decided to catch an Eevee here, which I wanted to eventually evolve into an Umbreon. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we evolved our Mareep into Flaffy and Riolu into Lucario. With this done, I faced the third gym leader, Berg, whose gym has been completely overhauled into this cool futuristic design. Once I beat him, I went up through Route 4 where I encountered Colress again, next to a bunch of Crustle. After mysteriously making them all move, he challenges us to a battle. After we beat him, we explore the route a bit more until going through Joint Avenue to Nimbasa City. Upon arrival, we meet the boy protagonist who asks us to fight these subway bosses with him. Before we challenge the next gym here though, I went to the Desert Resort to train up my team. And finally, when we're strong enough, I visited the old gym from Black and White. There was only a couple trainers here, but I still think it was cool that we were able to visit the old gym even though there is a completely new one. Also, I decided to ride the Ferris wheel because, hey, why not? But after doing that, we finally challenge Elisa. This time her gym is completely different and it's fused with a fashion show venue. It's really cool too because the gym battles are actually fused with the show and there's a crowd watching you. But after getting the 4th gym badge, we continue to explore Nimbasa City's huge sports stadiums, but not before we have to clear out some Team Plasma grunts causing problems. Here we also learn more about Hugh and why he even wanted to become a trainer. His goal is to save his little sister's purloin that was stolen 5 years ago by Team Plasma. With this in mind, we keep pushing forward through the Driftvale drawbridge and into Driftvale City. The first thing we see here is an old Team Plasma member in an argument with a current member. Apparently the group divided into 2 different groups after the events of the first game, with one being supporters of N and the other supporters of Getsus. We even go to meet some of the former members in a house along with N's childhood friends. Once we finished up with them, we head to the Driftvale City gym, and yes, it was also changed from the first game. But we make it through and defeat Clay for the 5th gym badge. Once we won though, Clay decided to show us a brand new area in the region, the Pokemon World Tournament. Basically, this is a competitive Pokemon tournament held within the region that is a significant part of the postgame. We do participate in a sort of introductory tournament, but in terms of fully discussing this place, that's for a whole different video about the postgame. Before moving on to the next area though, we meet Team Plasma once again, who seems to be running their base out of a huge ship. We aren't able to take them down though, because we're taken away by the Shadow Triad. With no other reason to stay here, I move on to the next route and the Chargestone Cave, where we evolved our Eevee into an Umbreon. At the end of the cave is Mistralton City, where our next gym badge is. Upon arrival, we meet Professor Juniper, who gives us a Master Ball, and Skyla, the gym leader. Before challenging her, I quickly went ahead to train on the next route and in the Celestial Tower. While we were here, we finally evolved our Flaffy into Ampharos. With this, I was ready to take on Skyla's gym and get the 6th gym badge. Now here's where things get a little cool though. So up to this point, our route through Unova has been pretty scrambled. We skipped the first few cities of the original and instead started across in Aspertia. However, we eventually ended up in Castelia City, where we've been following the traditional path of the region. But now we're taking a plane across the region to Lentimus Town. There honestly isn't much to do here though, so I moved on through Reversal Mountain, where Duat evolved into Samurott. In the mountain, we escort Bianca through and see the location of Heatran, although it isn't here right now. After making it through, I remember that there was actually a place I ignored earlier right before the mountain. This strange house had first reminded me instantly of the old chateau from Gen 4, and it was actually really creepy. Things seemingly teleported and changed every time I went through the doors, and at the end of the house I encountered some ghost girl that gave me a lunar wing. I remembered at this point that in the original games there was a girl on a bridge who randomly disappeared, so I guess this is her. After leaving this place, I also decided to catch a Vibrava so I could eventually get a Flygon. Now our team is technically complete, we just had to finish up some evolutions. With that done, we can now head through Undella Town and northward to Lacunosa Town. There aren't any gyms here or anything, but the town has a lot of lore that was interesting to learn from the NPCs. Right after Lacunosa is the Village Bridge, which also doesn't have much besides charm. The song that plays in the background actually develops depending on if you speak to certain NPCs. These are musicians scattered throughout the town, and honestly it was really nice going through and adding them all to the song. The Village Bridge has so much character, and I could never imagine Pokemon ever doing something like this again. But now it's time to head into Opalucid City to challenge the 7th gym leader Drayden's Dragon types. This battle would only be the beginning of the challenges though, because Team Plasma suddenly appears in a flying ship and freezes the entire city. The reason they did this was to find the DNA splicers hidden by Drayden. These things are really important because they have something to do with the legendary Pokemon Kyurem, which Team Plasma is trying to awaken. Before taking them out though, we finally evolve Growlithe into Arcanine since it has the correct moveset now. Despite our best efforts, Team Plasma manages to steal the DNA splicers and escape. At this point, all we can do is keep pushing on towards the 8th and final gym in Humalao City. During our gym battles, we evolve Vibrava into Flygon, finally completing our team's evolutions. After defeating the gym leader Marlin, we quickly check out the marine tube, then go explore the route above Humalao. We meet with Colress again, and he gives us a strange machine. After not finding much up here, we check out the seaside cave and find a crystal that's in the way of an exit. Using the Colress machine, we get it to move and discover Team Plasma's ship. We board it with Hugh and try and stop them, but right when we make it to the center, we're kicked off and the ship flees to the giant chasm. This time, we actually see the legendary Pokemon Kyurem up close in a pod. After defeating Colress, we head to the main control room, where where Ghetsis is hiding. But right as we arrive, Kyurem's revival had been completed and Ghetsis runs to claim it. Hugh also arrives and speaks with a member of the Shadow Triad who claims to have his sister's purloin that was stolen all those years ago. The problem is, it doesn't really respond to him. As sad as this was to hear, Hugh still takes it back despite its temperament. But now it's time to finally face Kyurem now that Ghetsis has it. And actually, Ghetsis doesn't play games this time around. He literally tries to kill us until N returns to Unova with Zekrom to try and save us. His help doesn't last for long though, as Ghetsis unleashes the DNA splicers and creates Black Kyurem by fusing with Zekrom. We easily take it down though, but that was only a warm-up because it's time to fight Ghetsis. Considering he was the final battle in the last game, it makes sense that he has a great team. Fortunately for us though, ours is just better and we defeat him. After the battle, N tries to convince Ghetsis to change his ways, but he's just too far gone and is taken away by a member of the Shadow Triad. At this point, Team Plasma is as good as disbanded and N flies away. Hugh comes in and tells us that he's pretty much done with his journey now that he rescued Purloin, but we still have work to do. Now that we have all 8 gym badges and Team Plasma defeated, it's time to head for Victory Road. This version of Victory Road is certainly one of my favorites, with it taking place throughout a huge mountain. Technically it is the same as last game, but it's a lot more detailed besides just a huge cliffside. But once we get past all that, we're finally here. Since we have the luxury to choose our first opponent, I picked Grimsley because I felt like we had a strong advantage against him. Our Lucario was easily able to handle the Leopard, and our Samurott destroyed the Crocodile. We send Lucario back out to handle the last 2 Pokemon with his fighting type advantage, and we easily beat Grimsley. Next, I wanted to fight Caitlyn. Her team isn't particularly amazing, however her first Pokemon Musharna tries to sleep your entire team with Yawn. Using Umbreon, we fought through it and knocked it out. Next, I sent out our Arcanine against her Reuniclus, who narrowly took it down. Then, I had Ampharos use some Thunderbolts on our Gothitelle until it was beaten by her Sigilith. Eventually, I sent out Flygon to stop it, and we got our second win in the Elite Four. Next, we fought Marshall. His team consists of fighting types which definitely could have hurt us if we were not careful. We didn't have anyone in particular who could sweep through his team, so I used a combination of everyone and got the victory. Now, the last Elite Four member, Chantal, was next. She starts with the Cofagrigus, and much like Marshall, has a solid team that we can't particularly sweep with one Pokemon. So we basically used every Pokemon on our team to beat her and defeated all the Elite Four members. Now it was time for the champion. Going into this, I don't believe we were told who the champion actually was, so when I arrived and saw Iris, I knew we were in for a fight. After all, you can't really get any better than a Dragon-type champion. Her team, by all standards, is pretty amazing. She starts with a Hydreigon, which I wasn't initially prepared for until Samurott was able to Ice Beam it to death. Next, she sent out a Lapras, which we one-shot with Ampharos. Then, Iris sent out Aggron, which we one-shot with Samurott. It was time for more Dragon types though, because she had Druddigon, which definitely gave us a problem. Using Arcanine Sheer Power though, we took it down and left us with one more Dragon type to deal with, Haxorus. This Pokemon is super overpowered, and honestly I thought we might lose here. It one-shot several of our Pokemon until I sent out our Samurott and hit 2 Ice Beams. Down to her last Pokemon, Iris sent out Archops, which gave me huge issues. Fortunately though, we sent out Ampharos to get us the victory, and now we are champions. I know throughout this video I probably didn't sound too excited about a lot of the places in this game, and that's mostly because I had a much more authentic reaction in my video about the original games. That being said, Pokemon Black and White 2 had all that great stuff and more. And of course, I didn't even go through the post-game yet, something worthy of its own video. If we're talking about the main adventure alone though, I genuinely might go ahead and say it. Pokemon Black and White 2 isn't just good. It could be the best Pokemon game I've ever played. Besides the absolutely insane regional decks it has, allowing for incredible teams, it gave us an interesting story following the events of the previous game. By recognizing that the player has probably played through the originals, it allowed for deeper exploration into certain characters and places in the game. The fact that you can't enter some routes because they're under construction, or that some places have been rebuilt and modernized really adds to the immersion. Even the NPCs themselves feel genuine throughout the adventure. Typically, Pokemon games will pick and choose who they want to have as important characters, they'll delve into the rivals, the evil teams, and the champion, but in Black and White 2, it feels like everyone has an important story to tell. Obviously, characters like your rival have a deep purpose as to why they want to be a trainer, but besides that, anytime you visit certain towns, there's an established culture that we're stepping into. Even if it's something as simple as a town being influenced by its climate, it still feels real. This is a feeling I haven't gotten in almost any Pokemon game after this, so it's safe to say there was something special with this game. Personally, I feel like if this game had better marketing beyond it just being a sequel, it would have sold so much better. Because realistically, this is so much more than a sequel or a third version. Pokemon Black and White 2 offers its own adventure, both connected yet separate from its predecessors. You don't need to play the originals to enjoy this game, but if you did, it enhances the experience so much. If you've been on the fence about trying Black and White 2, or even the first games for that matter, please give them a try. You won't regret it.